Here we go. Hi, welcome. I'm Laura Koenig, the Artistic Director for Anchorage Festival of Music, and welcome to this concert preview. It'll be about 15 minutes talking about From the Quills of Babes, a concert we will be bringing to you next weekend. This concert features music written by children. In fact, they are all musical prodigies from the Baroque and early classical eras. If you're watching this live tonight, when I'm done in about 15 minutes, you actually have an opportunity while I'm talking as well to interact with questions in the chat. Anything about the concert or the featured composers. First, I'd like to start with a few broad points about childhood in the Baroque and classical eras. A typical lifespan of a child born in the first part of the 18th century was between about 40 and 43 years old. Childhood was essentially more compressed than it is today. Across all spectrums of society, children took on family and work burdens very early. In fact, you see from this painting here, very often children were dressed just like adults, so they had just tiny outfits on. And the education in the 18th century of children really depended on the expected role of a child in society. And this was determined really by the accident of birth. So the class you were born into, your race, and the profession of your parents. The most common path to becoming a musician was to come from a musical family. Now, women in music were rare. Young girls rarely received a broad academic education as they were expected to run a household. All right, on our concert next weekend, we will have 6 child composers. Some of these names might be familiar to you. We'll talk a little bit about each one. Now, of those 6, 3, or half of them, came from musical families. And I want to start with talking about Jean-François Andrian. He was born in Paris to a family of musicians. And because of that, there certainly was an expectation that he would go on to be a musician. But he showed exceptional early musical ability. As a 5-year-old, he was invited to perform on harpsichord for the king, King Louis XIV. Next weekend's program will include a piece from Jean-François' first published opus. Like François Couperin, Dandrieux had a cosmopolitan style, a blending of French and Italian styles. And you can tell from this frontispiece, from one of his more famous later pieces, that he eventually ended up as an organist, or one of the organists to the king. Our next featured composer is Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. And it would be an understatement to say that CPE Bach came from a musical family. He really came from a musical dynasty. His father was, of course, Johann Sebastian Bach, and his godfather was Telemann. By a young adult, however, CPE's fame overtook that of his father. The piece on our concert next week was written when he was about 17 years old. And if you're familiar with CPE Bach's style, the middle, it's 3 movements long, so the middle slow movement will be the most familiar to you. It has a real sort of long, winding melody, which eventually gets to where it's supposed to go. But the first movement may be a little bit atypical to what you expect with CPE Bach, and it shows the strong influence of his father, his primary teacher. And I want to play just a snippet, maybe about 40 seconds of this first movement. Now, the recording I just played for you uses period instruments. So that was not a modern flute, it was a Baroque flute or a one-keyed flute. And the string instruments were using shorter bows. When we perform our concert next weekend, we will be using period instruments. So I won't be playing a modern flute, I'll be playing my Baroque traverso. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. This painting of Mozart dates from about the time of the piece that we're going to play by him next weekend. He's about 8 or 9 years old at this time. Now, the name Mozart, or Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, is really synonymous with the concept of a musical prodigy. And this fascination with Mozart's extraordinary abilities was also true of his contemporaries. Among the many accounts of Mozart as a child is this letter by the Honorable Daines Barrington describing his meeting this very remarkable young musician. Barrington describes how Mozart easily met on-the-spot challenges, such as improvising a whole piece if he was given a theme or a fugue from a subject. And for those who thought Mozart's father lied about the boy's age, Barrington assured readers that Mozart acted very much like his purported age. He says here, for example, whilst he was playing, this is the young Mozart to me, a favorite cat came in, upon which he immediately left his harpsichord, nor could we bring him back for a considerable time. He would also sometimes run about the room, a stick between his legs by way of horse. So it's wonderful to imagine Mozart running around the room with his hobby horse at the time that he composed the piece we'll be performing next week. Now, Mozart and his family famously traveled around Europe, and this included his sister, Maria or Nannerl. She was also musically precocious, but she had to give up her public music career when she got married. Now, this painting that you see here has Mozart's father playing with the young Mozart, but it was very common for Mozart to, on the spot, play with a rich or royal person who wanted to play their flute or violin with Mozart. Now, next week we are going to perform his flute sonata that he wrote when he was 9 years old. And I want to play this, the version you're going to hear right now is for harpsichord and violin, because they could have done on either one. And I'm going to play a short excerpt from it. I want you to listen for the violin. So it's very much driven by the harpsichord. Mozart wasn't going to let anything up to chance, and also this made his rich or royal duet partner sound very good, since the young Mozart was very capable on the harpsichord. All right, so back to Barrington's account. And in this, he talks about another child prodigy, that of Handel. Of course, Handel, by the time this letter was published, had just recently passed away. And Barrington hopes that Mozart can achieve the amount of success that Handel had had. Handel, another composer featured on our concert, was, like Mozart, a child prodigy. But Handel did not come from a musical family. His father was a barber surgeon employed by a duke, and his early biographies were published during his lifetime. So there are some stories that have come out about Handel's childhood. We don't have nearly the amount of information that we do about Mozart's childhood. But there is some evidence that Handel actually fed these stories. And from these stories, we learn that Handel's father was dead set against his son studying music. Handel claimed to have kept a small keyboard up in the attic of his house so that he could go and very muffled play and practice. And if in the middle of the night he got a musical inspiration, he would run up the stairs and play on his keyboard. Now, this painting here is definitely not the keyboard I can imagine they would have carried up to the attic. In fact, this rendition is from the 20th century, imagining what Handel would have been like. Of course, what's happening here is father is discovering the young Handel at the keyboard and admonishing his indiscretions, his musical indiscretions. Eventually, though, his father was convinced by his employer that Handel should get instruction and compositional training. The piece that we're going to be playing next week was written when Handel was just 14 years old. I want to play a little snippet of this piece. It's actually the oldest extant piece that we know of that Handel wrote. And you can see from the frontispiece here, it's a trio sonata, which could have been played with 2 violins or 2 flutes or 2 oboes or any combinations thereof. This recording I have is the 2 violin version. We'll be doing it with flute and violin next weekend. Extraordinarily beautiful, and it's amazing to think that this was composed by Handel at just the age of 14. Our next composer is Pasquale Bini, and as a teenager, he caught the eye of the famed violinist and composer Tartini, who took him under his wing. According to Tartini, the young Bini plays better than I do, and I'm proud of it, for he is an angel in morals and religion. His skills were so great that a rival violinist was rumored to have died from despair. There was no way he could possibly achieve the greatness of this young child. Now, like many prodigies, there is a danger of a child adapting to oldest attention. And the few accounts we have of Bini's life, we know that his mental health was indeed extremely fractured. In fact, in this inscription on this drawing of him, it says he is a very good violin player, particularly when solo, and he is a very good young man. But he has problems with the spirit, and his mental health deteriorated over his relatively short life. And we have very little music written by him that has survived. One of the pieces is his sonata for violin in G major, and I could not find a commercial recording of this, so if you want to hear this solo violin piece, you're going to have to come to the concert to hear Don Lindsay perform it next weekend. Our last of the 6 composers is Maria Rosa Coccia. She had a lot of strikes against her. She did not come from a family of musicians. Her father was a pharmacist. They lacked money and station, and most importantly, she was a woman. When she was only 13, however, she wrote a full oratorio, and just to show about the fact that she was a woman being detrimental to her musical career, she could not attend the performance in Rome because women were not allowed to go to oratorio performances. She was also the first woman to achieve the master of the chapel of Rome, but a rival of hers who had failed the test, because it was a pretty prestigious honor that you received after taking a test. But a rival who had failed his exam twice published an attack on her, stating the exam was that she had made many errors on her exam, and that she was only accepted, ironically, because she was a woman. Now, friends of hers published a defense of her, but this definitely did blemish her career. Now, the piece we'll be playing by her next weekend comes from her very early collection of harpsichord sonatas. These were written when she was only 12 years old, and they are dedicated to Prince Charles Edward Stuart, the grandson of the exiled English King James II. And as you see, that says Carlo III or Charles III because he claimed a right to the throne. He's also known as the Bonnie Prince Charlie. Now, this particular sonata will be performed by a returning guest for Anchorage Festival of Music, and that is Jonathan Salzito. Jonathan came up last fall, and he worked on the Anchorage Festival of Music harpsichord and the UAA harpsichord, and we had them in a concert playing together. He and Susan Wingrove Reed played both harpsichords together, and we called it Perfect Harmony because they sounded so nice together, two large, full-sized harpsichords. And you can actually see this full concert on our YouTube channel now. But we are really thrilled to have Jonathan Salzito returning to Anchorage, and he will be featured on every single piece, but particularly the harpsichord sonata. The other performers are myself on Baroque flute, Don Lindsay on violin, and John Letterman and Linda Autumn on cello. The concert is going to be in a private home on the lower hillside, so there are very few seats, so you need to book your reservation or purchase your ticket early. This is Sunday, October 2nd at 4 p.m. Tickets are available at centertix.com or 907-263-ARTS. And admission includes a post-concert reception, which will include wine. If you are unable to attend the Sunday performance, we will be having what we're billing as a pay-what-you-can dress rehearsal on Saturday, October 1st at 4 p.m. This is non-ticketed. Seats must be reserved by calling 907-276-2645, that's Anchorage Festival of Music, or emailing afmtickets@gmail.com by September 30th. And you can find this information on our website or on our brochure. So thank you for joining me this evening. There's a little bit of a delay here between me and what happens in the chat, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if there aren't any questions, I will be ending this live stream. But I heartily hope to see you at one of our performances next weekend, either on our dress rehearsal on October the 1st or on the concert on Sunday. Thank you.